It's a Sunday afternoon and Farrell's ice cream parlor is bustling with families, birthday parties, and a Little League football team. They have no idea this seemingly innocent scene is about to spiral into an unimaginable tragedy. As witnesses watch in horror, an aircraft from the nearby airport careens off course, heading straight toward the packed shop. It was the perfect fall day for the Golden West Sport Aviation Air Show. The two-day event showcased static and aerial exhibitions of experimental and antique aircraft. Among the showpieces was a rebuilt Canadian F-86 Sabre jet, one of over 340 planes built for combat in 1953. Surplus Sabres were converted to drones for the U.S. Army and used in missile testing, but several continued to fly with private owners. At the jet's controls was 36-year-old Richard Bingham, director of a small aviation company, who rebuilt the jet after being in storage for 10 years. Bingham had over 2,000 hours of flight experience, but had spent less than 4 hours in the cockpit of the Sabre, setting the tone for what would become one of the nation's worst air-to-ground disasters. Earlier in the day, the plane had showcased low-level passes over the field and various acrobatic maneuvers. After a successful display, the pilot prepared for his return flight home to Oakland. Meanwhile, families across town were looking forward to a balmy Sunday filled with ice cream and desserts. Not even a mile from the airport, over 100 people, including the Sacramento 49ers Little League football team, were enjoying the icy treats at Farrell's Ice Cream Parlor. Located in the Crossroads Shopping Center, the parlor faced the end of the runway, making for a thrilling experience as diners watched the planes taking off. Back at the airport, Bingham started taxiing down the runway. He was accustomed to taking off from a 10,000-foot-long airstrip, but the one at Sacramento Airport was much shorter, measuring only 5,000 feet. For the high-powered Sabre, however, this should not pose any problem at all. But with an inexperienced pilot, it could be disastrous. Witnesses watched as Bingham accelerated down the tarmac. The jet initially lifted 2 feet off the ground before touching down again and decelerating momentarily as its nose remained pitched. This happened at about 3,500 feet down the runway. Seconds later, and with 1,500 feet of runway left, the Sabre sped up again to 160 miles per hour and appeared to be airborne again, lifting about 5 feet off the ground. But it soon became clear the pilot simply could not gain enough altitude and started the rejected takeoff procedure. He closed the throttle, touched down, and continued straight ahead, trying to slow the aircraft. Then, catastrophe struck in quick succession. Still traveling at high speed, the plane continued racing down the airstrip until it ran out of tarmac. Unable to stop, it overshot the runway and mounted onto a nearby levee before crashing through a chain-link fence. The metal fence ruptured the fuel tanks, which erupted into flames. Plowing across the adjacent 4-lane Freeport Boulevard, the Sabre collided with a passing vehicle. The intense force propelled the car along, and the plane crashed through several more parked vehicles in the shopping center parking lot. All the pilot could do was cover his face. Eventually, the jet crashed through the wall of Farrell's party room and came to a rest. Witnesses saw a fiery explosion expanding at least 10 feet. Soon after, the storefront was completely engulfed in flames. The local fire department was swiftly mobilized, including support from an airport crash crew and U.S. Air Force personnel nearby. When they arrived on the chaotic scene, just minutes later, towering black smoke billowed from the building. Charred vehicles had been flung sideways, and victims were scattered amid rubble and flames. Even though the parlor was fitted with sprinklers, flames had engulfed the front room of the venue and the surrounding area where the plane and vehicles collided. Due to the extensive fire and collapsed structural walls, firefighters battled extreme heat and hazards to reach survivors. The heat was so intense that it charred the paint on the parked vehicles 60 feet away, while the blast shock toppled mannequins in nearby shop windows. Seeing the smoke from the explosion, spectators at the air show ran towards the crash site. Among them, a senior was fatally hit by a truck while rushing to the scene, mistakenly thinking her grandkids were at the parlor. While her grandchildren weren't there at the time of the accident, other children were. 4-year-old Carrie Frances McCluskey was celebrating a friend's birthday party with her identical twin sister Christy. The twins were excited to be served Farrell's signature dish, which arrived at their table with great fanfare on a stretcher. But just as the colossal sundae arrived, they heard a crashing sound before being dumped into darkness as smoke from the wreckage filled the room. That was the last time Carrie saw her twin alive. Eyewitnesses provided chilling accounts of the horrifying scene that unfolded inside Farrell's.
I was all right until I saw a fire, and then I put a spoon in my mouth. The explosion hit, and I was blown to the next seat, and that's all I remember. Then I walked over the table. I couldn't find my father, but I was with my other sisters and my brothers. They didn't find our mother yet.
About 17 kids from the 49ers were seated near the front window, looking out on the end of the runway. When the jet crashed into the building, its impact obliterated the entire wall, shoving the children across the room. Tragically, most victims were later discovered amongst the rubble in that very area. Finding survivors tested even the most seasoned rescuers. Emergency responders started dragging patrons from the burning parlor, and rescue efforts went on for hours, despite the scorching heat. A makeshift coroner's office was set up in the parking lot. Miraculously, the pilot was pulled from the wreckage alive, with a broken arm and facial injuries. He kept repeating, I'm sorry, please help get the people out." Survivors who were rushed to nearby medical centers were backed up in the hallways because there was no resources to handle a disaster of that magnitude. As a result, many of the burn victims had to be taken to San Francisco or Los Angeles for care. As firefighters pulled more bodies from the rubble, it became disturbingly clear this was one of California's worst aviation disasters. But the true extent would only become known once all the bodies were retrieved. In perhaps the most tragic aspect of the accident, an 8-year-old child survived the crash, but lost 9 close family members, including both parents, 2 brothers, a sister, 2 grandparents, and 2 cousins. As night fell, there were already 28 people in need of medical care. Following the crash, a host of unanswered questions hung heavy in the air. The NTSB launched a comprehensive probe, sifting through the wreckage piece by piece. And as authorities investigated, disturbing failures came to light. At the hearing, the pilot recounted his experience on that fateful day. According to the pilot's account, everything appeared normal as he went down the runway and initiated liftoff. That's when he noticed a strange vibration under his seat. Concerned, he briefly contemplated aborting the takeoff, but ultimately decided to touch down and resume the ascent when the vibration diminished. Despite being aware of the limited runway available, he believed there was still a chance for the aircraft to become airborne. The pilot's instructor raised concerns regarding Bingham's ability to master the Sabre with only 3.5 hours of experience in its cockpit. However, the instructor did not object to his certification, assuming that he would seek further training. Bingham had recorded 2,085 flying hours in his logbook. Of those, 342 hours were listed as flight time in jets, specifically Learjets. While all jet time helps with quick reactions, the Learjet handles differently than the F-86 Sabre. The Learjet allowed for aggressive nose tilting during takeoff. However, the F-86's design made it susceptible to stalling if the nose was pitched up too much too quickly. Investigators concluded that over-rotation during takeoff was one of the reasons leading to the crash. The NTSB report also cited visual cues as a contributing factor. Bingham was accustomed to taking off in the jet from Oakland's runway, over 10,000 feet long and bounded by San Francisco Bay, providing an unlimited visual horizon. In contrast, Sacramento runway was half that length and hemmed in by various obstacles, including trees, buildings, and water towers. These factors and limited visibility from the cockpit may have created a sense of urgency to take off quickly, potentially causing the plane to rotate excessively. The final report confirmed the warplane was up to safety standards and the pilot was certified, but highlighted significant flaws in certifying aircraft and pilot authorizations. The FAA now bans former military jets from flying over populated areas without pre-approved routes and mandates rigorous pilot proficiency tests. Under these updated standards, Bingham would not have been granted permission to fly the warplane. Court battles ensued as victims' families filed lawsuits against the plane's owners and operators. It took nearly 4 years of litigation before a settlement was reached in 1976. Through the defendants' insurance policies, victims' families received $5 million to be divided among them. 22 people lost their lives in the tragedy. The youngest was only 2 years old. Many of the fatalities were connected to the Sacramento 49ers Little League. Most had perished from thermal burns or smoke inhalation in the blaze. The Crossroads Shopping Complex was replaced by the Sacramento Public Safety Center, and a memorial park now stands where Farrell's front door once was. Watch this episode next if you found this video interesting. Please add a like and leave a comment if you want to support the channel.